This tip is related to paying attention to grain direction and the carving technique that goes along with it. So I'll be using as an example to demonstrate this kind of flower type pattern with the bloom and then leaves or something coming off the side there as an example. So this is a wedding plate that I'm working on, and I just transferred that same pattern here onto a practice board to demonstrate what I'm talking about. So for the first cut, there's nothing really to talk about too much. As a kind of a standard grip and everything, since this cut is going with the grain, coming from, if we kind of draw a line here in the wood, then we're going, as we cut this way, we're going from a short length of grain to a longer length of grain. So everything works out fine. I can just do normal thing there. But we want to be aware as we continue on. So let me do the longer grain here. I drew where the middle point is on this chip to demonstrate on this next one. So do the along the grain cut here. Again, works fine. And same deal for this one. Now the next cut is where things get more interesting, because this, if I carve with the same normal direction, I'm going to end up carving against the grain. So I'm coming from a shorter or a longer grain here. If I start here, the difference from here to here is a longer grain than here, and so that means I'm cutting against the grain, and that's going to produce a more jagged, not as nice cut. It also can run into issues with the blade itself kind of catching in the grain. So I'll go ahead and do that to kind of demonstrate it. Sometimes it's more of an issue than others, but I also find if you look at this angle that's made between these two sides of the cut, that's a wider angle than between these two. And I usually personally prefer to come from a tighter angle rather than starting at this one. I find it easier to get down the knife to the bottom. But you can see the cut. It's okay, but it's not a very smooth line here because the knife kind of was getting caught up in the grain a little bit and wants to keep going straight. So I have to force it to carve against the grain in that situation. And then this last or other side here is fine, but I'll demonstrate on this one then as well. The last chip in this segment. Go ahead and carve this one out real quick. So you can see that one line compared to that one is much smoother since I was going with the grain. And now this one, not only am I going against the grain, but I'm starting out with an along the grain cut. So the first part of this is really in line with the grain, and the knife doesn't want to make that turn as I go along that cut. So it becomes pretty challenging to get nice cuts when you make that transition, especially with a tight ridge here. And it's probably hard to see on camera, but I ended up cutting off some of the ridge. So right here is actually shorter than right here because the knife went too far. So the solution then is to cut with the grain on every cut as much as you can. So again, these first two cuts on here are not a big deal. You can see how nice and smooth those are. So I'll do these first two again that are both in the direction that I want to go. Now instead of starting up here, I'm going to start here, but that means I have to flip the knife over. So this is my normal grip, and I need to go backwards now. And there's different ways you can do it. You can actually grab the whole thing and put your thumb on the back and do it that way. Kind of whatever is comfortable for you. What I find is comfortable and gives me good control is kind of pinching it this way and then using my other hand to guide it. So starting here, and again just normal cut and guiding along that line. And so you can see how smooth and nice this cut is compared to this one because of going with the grain. And so you really need to at some point learn to use that kind of a backhand reverse grip compared to this kind of standard starting grip. And I skipped over it on my first example here, but this is another place where that's a good place to use it, is flip it over and do this cut. And again, that has the benefit of going from this tight angle to a wider angle. And maybe that's just me, but I always find that easier to get the knife because I'm able to move the knife in this direction as I'm pushing it deeper, whereas if I start here, I need to push the knife straight down before I'm able to start dragging it because the tip is actually further beyond where I'm dragging the knife into. So something else, kind of another reason that's easier. But so here now again, go with this backhand cut, and now it's coming into and along the grain cut instead of trying to come out of it. And that's a much easier pattern, a much easier direction for the knife and the wood to interact. So even though when I first drew them, this pattern was not as nice as this one, the resulting chips are all much smoother and even. None of the ridge got cut out on this one compared to here. So there's different times that you'll find that. The biggest thing, like I said, is when you're going against the grain, that you really want to make sure to flip the knife backwards. And it's a little bit more of advanced technique. When you're still doing mostly 2- and 3-sided chips, it can usually work out okay to just stick with this grip all the time. For this bad one, I could try to clean that up a little bit. And it's not a horrible chip, but definitely not as nice as this one. So highly recommend making sure to learn and practice on knot projects. This kind of backhand grip. Try different grips, see which one works for you, that you can find control and enough strength to do the carving, and make sure to use that when you're doing your projects.